Hey folks, it's Patriot Nurse. Thanks for joining me today. In this video, we're going to discuss how to prepare for the diseases of World War III. If you're new to the channel, thanks for being here on the Patriot Nurse channel. We cover self-sufficiency and preparedness towards the medical with a lens through history. And so this lens of history is what's going to inform us, and I hope you'll stay with me for the entirety of the video because I really think you're going to get some solid information here. Probably not going to hear this many other places, and you're going to be able to have a well and better formed plan to move yourself into a place of more self-sufficiency whenever things kick off. So it's the first duty of every intelligent man to state the obvious, right? We are on the precipice of World War III. There is no question about this. Arguably, you could say that we have been on this railroad since World War I, and maybe even the Franco-Prussian War before then. But still, what we are facing here is the results of decades of moves and counter moves and of a place really where the global situation is about to shift drastically because the big kid in town has kind of aged out of his prime. That is the United States and the West's hegemonic status in the world. We are about to transition out. No question, currency issues are a part of this, but my goal here is to be honest about the problem and do the work, to look at the diseases that have historically showed up throughout history during times of war. We need to look at what undergirds a person's likelihood to contract these diseases and what we can do from a preparedness standpoint to empower ourselves to take steps to secure our own family's health without respect to needing things from a government or to being dependent upon supplies and really dependent upon the white coat world. The more that we can select towards agency, the more that we can select towards empowerment and the less towards needing people who may or may not be supportive of our political viewpoint, shall we say, the better we're going to be. So the real issue here on how we need to calibrate our preparedness. Be honest about this problem. What is the problem of disease during times of war? There are three main disease/healthcare preps from a vantage point we must consider in order to be well-rounded in our preps. And they are respiratory diseases, digestive diseases, and wound care. Period. Case closed. If you look throughout human history, recount the last 3,500 to 5,000 years of recorded history, human beings have dealt with respiratory, digestive, and wound issues in general. But especially during times of war, this is an area that we really need to focus our preps on. So I'm going to go over this with you here, and we're going to cover respiratory, digestive, and wounds, what you can do here to set yourself up for success without having reference to needing a government or to needing supplies that can only be purchased at a pharmacy, etc. So let's go over respiratory diseases. Let me ask you a question. What are the key risk factors for contracting respiratory diseases now, like in peacetime? What are the key risk factors? Think for a minute. Your key risk factors, number one, nutrient deficiencies. No question, nutrient deficiencies. And why is it that I'm leading with nutrient deficiencies as opposed to overall exposure to a pathogen, right? We are constantly exposed to pathogens, whether it's a cold virus or COVID or a bacteria of some sort. We are constantly exposed to these in our surroundings, but we don't always get sick. So what's the balancing act here? Nutrient deficits set our body up to not have the tools it needs to combat this constant onslaught of immune system challenge. Vitamin D is a huge part of this. The two risk factors, by the way, for contracting tuberculosis, which is a respiratory disease, the two biggest risk factors for contracting TB, low body weight and vitamin D deficiency. There's a study that was done actually, I believe it was in Siberia in the 60s. And it evaluated family members who were placed in an active TB household. Effectively, somebody in the house tested positive for active TB. Other family members had not. And what was the factor that ultimately they determined, factor or factors, which contributed to that likelihood to contract TB? Low body weight and vitamin D deficiency. So a good quality source of vitamin D, that is a helpful thing. Fermented cod liver oil is my personal favorite as far as a food supplement. Also a whole food supplement like Green Vibrance. And that link actually is on my website to the products that I recommend. You can find that at thepatriotnurse.com. These are really important to keep yourself built up. But let's talk about some reactive options here. It is helpful to go to pharmacies and go to the Dollar Tree, and I've done videos as such, trying to equip you to pick things to store from a white coat world of pharmaceuticals. Things like cough syrup, dextromethorphan, guaifenesin. These are the standard treatment protocols that are, FDA approved with the stamp of Big Pharma to say these are the way to go to treat respiratory diseases. But here's the issue. Are you really treating anything? Are you really helping somebody by suppressing their symptoms? Not a trick question. No, the answer is no. We're not really fixing anything by suppressing a cough. We're not fixing the root cause of the issue. The root cause is typically that the body is running a nutrient deficit, and we need to build those nutrients back up in order to support it. And so as far as things that you can use, there are a couple of things that I really recommend. First off, the gold standard of support for the respiratory tract is really 4 main herbs: mullein, marshmallow, wild cherry bark, and comfrey leaf. Okay. Now, as a matter of fact, I think all of those, if I'm not mistaken, are in the 20 herb kit that I sell on my website. But these herbs you can grow yourself. You can get them in a powdered or a cut source, and you can make teas out of them to help support these tissues. In order for your body to fight off these diseases, okay, that are coming, you have to have tissues that are nourished. It is not enough. It is not enough, I say it again, to purchase the white coat world pharmaceutical stuff and call it good. That is one potential part of the equation to help your family ride out a really bad cough, cold, flu season, and also just the regular diseases that spread around in times of warfare. When you look at, for instance, the influenza outbreak, in the early part, really leading up to World War I, the influenza outbreak, there's a lot of really interesting studies that have shown, like, where did this come from? Was it originally from burning a pile of garbage near an army encampment with pig feces, or was this brought back from Europe on the trains? There's a lot of back and forth about it, but here's the bottom line. The people that surmount these viruses and bacterial-borne respiratory diseases, these are people who generally have a decent BMI, meaning they're not obese, but they have some fat on them. So they have a little bit to spare, but also their overall diet is one that is rich in nutrients. And here's the challenge here for us in the survival food storage world, right? A lot of the food storage that we have that is shelf stable is really deprived of its natural vitality and a lot of these micronutrients. That is the trade-off that you have to run whenever you're looking at 10 to 30 year shelf stable food versus nutrients. If it's shelf stable, it's dead. If it's alive and vital, it's not going to last very long. So how do we balance this sweet spot here with, okay, well, I have beans and rice that are Mylar packed and stored for 30 years. But in the event of World War III, how in the world am I going to be able to cover these nutrient bases? Because here's the thing, guys. Whether it's respiratory, digestive, or wound care, you are going to have supportive nutrients to keep your tissues operating the way that they need to. You will not get that with 30-year shelf-stable food. It's not going to happen. So you either have to have your own food production going ahead of time, or you need some type of superfood as a stopgap measure that's going to cover your bases in the meantime. Behold the power of the herbal superfoods. These superfoods that I've mentioned here, whether it's mullein or marshmallow root or wild cherry bark or comfrey, all of these are important in supporting and nourishing the tissues themselves, regardless of what the confronting pathogen is. It does not matter if it's diphtheria or pertussis or tuberculosis or influenza or your regular seasonal rhinovirus, the cold. It doesn't matter. The purpose here in selecting these as supportive, nutrient, life-giving foods is to cover your bases so that your body and its inherent immunological wisdom can combat and confront that enemy regardless of what is coming in full front in front of it. So this is the benefit with having a holistic and an herbal approach to overall preparedness. Okay, so that's respiratory. Having the herbs to cover your bases to make sure that you've got something in the meantime that can nutrify your tissues. If you're looking for just a few things to add as far as like a one-stop shop for your herbal preparations, the echinacea extract. Echinacea is a wonderful herb. prepared in various different ways to help nourish and support particularly the deep parts of the immune system. And so this, by the way, this is in your kit, the Dr. Christopher's Family Herbal Kit. That's on the website. I've got a link to that as well. And then also there is another herb here that's quite useful. If you can't get a hold of marshmallow root, this is in the kit as well, the Family Herbal Kit. This is slippery elm. And slippery elm is useful. We're going to segue now into digestive diseases. Slippery elm is useful in nourishing and soothing inflamed tissues, particularly mucous membranes, because it is in the category of herbs whose action it's known as a demulcent. So it adds moisture where it needs to be there. It helps balance the mucous membranes and decrease inflammation. Slippery elm is really helpful for supporting these mucous membranes, regardless of whether they're in the respiratory tract or the digestive tract. So let's fast forward here. We mentioned respiratory. Anytime that you've got warfare in general and people are together, cloistered, think like a troop movement or the Marines on the aircraft carriers, any type of congregation of people together for prolonged periods of time where vitamin D levels are lower and also where droplets are being exchanged and where ventilation may or may not be where it needs to be, that's going to set people up for respiratory disease. And respiratory disease tends to be more prominent and spread during the winter. Now let's fast forward into spring and summer, because I guarantee you, when this thing kicks off, this is not going to be an isolated few week long incident. As those of you who are students of history know, world wars and conflicts that are multifactorial in their origin points, these last for years. And so you can expect that supply lines are going to be messed up, not just for a season like in winter, unfortunately, but also into spring and summer. So let's think about diseases that spread in spring and summer. These are primarily the waterborne fecal-oral digestive diseases. Examples of digestive diseases: amoebic dysentery, that's a big one. Dysentery, cholera is another one. Cholera historically was a huge killer of people during wartime, because if you have one water supply for an entire village or an entire area, all you have to do to take down that populace is to poison the water. Whether on purpose or just as a consequence of sewage and filtration systems not being maintained, not being operated well, and going down for any amount of time, the digestive diseases asymmetrically spread during warm weather, okay? And so with digestive diseases, whether it's cholera, whether it's dysentery, your standard rotavirus and norovirus that gets spread around kids' daycares, also cytomegalovirus is another one. There's a lot of yuck and 24-hour bugs that get spread. But when you compound water contamination on top of it, which is unfortunately a very regular casualty of war-torn areas, you are going to see an exponential and rapid increase in communicable fecal-oral diseases. So the standard way that these are addressed nowadays is with conventional antibiotics, like Cipro, for instance, or erythromycin or doxycycline. A lot of these, and for instance, doxycycline and Cipro have been the gold standard for cholera treatment up until recently, when Cipro was found to be not as effective in many cases with new strains of cholera that are multi-drug resistant. So here's the thing. If you have the antibiotics stored, that is helpful, but antibiotics and their availability are quite subject to supply line issues, and also they have a very limited window of application based on exactly which type of bacteria are causing the suspected disease. So they have a very limited bandwidth as far as their applicability. If we default, however, to the herbs, and we look at the herbal world, again, understanding that these are superfoods, okay? These superfoods are going to nourish the underlying tissues. Go back and ask you a question. Which tissues then need support? Which tissues need nutritional supplementation during bouts of digestive disease? You guessed it, the stomach, the intestines, the entire GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract. So then we have to ask the question, which superfoods and or which herbs support those tissues in particular? Which herbs have an affinity towards that? You probably have heard this one, and that's ginger. Ginger is fairly easy to grow, unless, of course, you have some farm animals who love to graze them and eat them down like mine did. I was not able to keep, with goats, I was not able to keep garlic or ginger going. Forget it. Ginger, though, has a very long track record, multiple thousand-year track record of treating digestive diseases in Chinese medicine and traditional cultures, but also treating digestive diseases that are parasitic borne, not just bacterial borne, okay? And there have been several studies which evaluated the vermicidal, meaning like killing pests, killing parasites, the vermicidal activity of ginger to various different parasites, pathogens, particularly those that are seafood borne, actually, which is one of the reasons why in Japan, if you look at the traditional way, of course, that sushi is served, it is served with ginger. And there's a lot of thought that this was actually incepted by native wisdom, which showed people effectively over the generations, you eat sushi with ginger to help expel any parasites and really to prevent them from attaching inside the lining of the intestines. Really fascinating. So ginger is really helpful regardless of which disease it is that's causing it. The goal here, again, with the herbs is to support and nourish the tissues. Now, let's take a pause for a second here and let's evaluate, again, what is our perspective? The point of this video here is I'm not giving you a little like quick check off, okay, buy this and then you're squared away. No. Whenever we lack perspective, problem solving, education, we are not free and independent people. This is a very important thing to understand. Buying stuff is just part of the preparedness equation. And I think most of my subscribers and viewers who have been with me for a while understand this concept. You guys are pretty dialed in. You understand. The thing is, the white coat world and the traditional, I guess I should say, the legacy preparedness world tends to focus on purchasing first aid kits, nothing wrong with that, focusing asymmetrically on trauma care, which again, in a war zone, there is a place for it. But I would like to point out here that even in times of ethnic cleansing in Rwanda, more people were dying from communicable diseases in refugee camps than were being macheted to death in the fields. So warfare brings with it more than just the kinesthetic violence component of death and disease. There's the disease component that comes when people egress from a theater, meaning they flee from an area where there's fighting, an area of operation, and then they congregate together wherein usually there's common water, common food supply, lots of people in a very dense area, which is just prime for spreading disease. So having options in the herbal realm allows you to have a greater degree of flexibility and not be dependent upon factories, production, big pharma, and supply lines. If there is anything that we have learned over the past 5 years, it is A, the just-in-time inventory system does not work, and then B, COVID taught us more than anything else the delicacy and the vulnerability of our very highly interconnected geopolitical supply structure. Okay, so when you consider then, before we go back into the digestive and conclude with wound care, when you consider that potentially the newly forming opposing hegemonic power that we're facing, which is Russia, China, potentially Iran, this is how it's coalescing, China controls a lot of our, not just regular supplies like the cheapo stuff from Amazon. China controls an awful lot of our medical supplies and general pharmaceutical supplies. Do we really, have we not learned, do we really want to be dependent upon that infrastructure, an entire ocean away, potentially when there are economic and sanction, like response, move and counter moves? We don't want to be dependent upon that. And really, even if you think that there's nothing going on, why would you want to be dependent upon something that, could take weeks and weeks to get here as opposed to something in your own backyard? So again, if we're looking at nourishing these tissues, we have to focus on the digestive feeding herbs in particular. There's two really good mixtures in the Dr. Christopher's kit, the lower bowel formula and also X-Infex. These two together are wonderful for nourishing the tissue ahead of time. In the United States and the Western world, because of our diets, people's transverse colons, which is essentially the horizontal part of the large intestine, you have ascending, transverse, descending colon. This transverse colon right here is quite responsible for a lot of immune system functioning in our body, but here's the thing. This is a smooth muscle tissue. This tissue is comprised of smooth muscle, which cannot be willfully contracted like skeletal muscle. The only thing that essentially governs this smooth muscle, the transverse colon's contraction, is the overall health and nutrition functionality of that local tissue, and then also the balance between the nerve center in the brain back and forth to those terminating nerves, those terminating neurons in that transverse colon. This does not get maintenance unless we nourish that tissue locally. So really, this is the whole point of the lower bowel formula. Its main herbs are Cascara sagrada, golden seal, Turkey rhubarb, red raspberry leaf, very valuable, fennel, barberry, ginger, surprise, surprise, lobelia, and cayenne pepper. And now with the X-Infects, I think I've spoken about this before, but I'm going over these not just because they're an easy, applicable way for you just to go ahead and like grab the kit and take it with you, but these also have the herbs, and you really should understand what these herbs are for. And also, these herbs grow in your own backyard in many ways. The X-Infects is traditionally used to support and nourish the body during times of bouts of infectious disease, primarily caused by candida and by bacteria and parasites. These herbs in particular nourish the body in such a way that it has more of the nutrients necessary to be able to mount an effective defense. That is the entire point of herbal support in the midst of one of these infections, commonly seen during warfare. The herbs that are included in the X-Infects: black walnut, golden seal, plantain, bugleweed or bugleweed, wild-crafted marshmallow root, and lobelia. So these herbs have really a panacea of effect, and many of them grow in your own backyard. So knowing that the world is increasingly coming into conflict, and knowing that in spring and summertime this is what primarily gets spread, this is something that we should be willing to consider as part of our overall preparedness and as part of our overall goal towards self-sufficiency. In one of the books, I've recommended this before, but the Dr. Christopher's Herbal Home Healthcare book here, this book is fantastic as an intro to how to use these herbs and really how to support the body in its fight against seasonal infectious diseases. But when you consider, again, and I'm going to conclude with the wound care, when you consider the nature of the cycle and events of history, war begets supply line disruptions, which ultimately culminate in famine. And as someone who has looked in the face of people throughout history, and also in my short-term medical work, nutrient deficiencies are very, very sad. And nutrient deficiencies are more than just a page in your textbook in nursing school or in medical school. These are real people. And in many cases, real people who, because of not getting enough to eat and not getting quality foods, even in developed worlds, are more susceptible to sickness that they can die from, particularly children under the age of 5, God forbid. So this is something we really need to pay attention to, not just with our own family, but really making quality decisions every day as far as what we, particularly as women, what we choose to feed our family. That may be a little bit traditional of me and, anti-woke, but women are the ones typically who spend most of the money in the household. They do most of the grocery shopping. They also do most of the food prep. So ladies, it's up to us. If we're going to keep our family healthy, we got to know how to prepare quality foods. And also, really, the herbal world allows us to use superfood nutrition to support our family's health as well. So let's conclude here of our areas to focus on with World War III preps with wound care. So wounds get complicated in happy times. But when you factor in, again, multiple layers of conflict in the world, if you find yourself in a place that you didn't want to be, or you find yourself in a support role for really mitigating conflict that's local and close by to you, wound care is going to be a huge part of this. In the United States, and this is why history is so flippin' important, in the United States, we have seen this before in our country. In the 1860s, with the war between the states, we had entire areas of Virginia and Tennessee in particular, that were the main theater. Maryland is another. They were the main theater for much of these conflicts. And asymmetrically, the people who found themselves on the front lines making makeshift hospitals and improvised nursing care, these were women of the gentle families, primarily of Virginia and Tennessee and somewhat of Maryland, whose homes were effectively commandeered to be used as field hospitals. During the time, this is actually a really good bit of trivia for you if you're fascinated by history. During the time of the war between the states, germ theory was not really well understood at this point, and the relationship between cleanliness and between bacteria and really the necessity of daily dressing changes, daily wound care, ambulation, getting people up, getting them moving, this was not fully understood. And so one of my historical heroines, Captain Sally Tompkins of the Confederacy, Sally Tompkins was a gentlewoman of Virginia, and despite being told that she was a meddlesome woman by the prevailing powers that be during the day, she insisted upon daily dressing changes, walking the men who were wounded, and getting them up and bathing them, effectively. Cleanliness. Now, we look at cleanliness as the natural outworking of a developed country. But how do we support people in times of really a lack of nutrition? Because here's the thing. During times of war, food supplies do not go to the civilian populace, especially in a centrally planned economy or a war machine. Where do they go? Where do the food supplies go? Where do all the supplies go? To the fighting forces. So that means that the people on the back end, the civilians, and effectively the people who are not the door kickers, they're the ones who are low prioritized as far as nutrition. Let me ask you a question. Can you satisfactorily heal from any wound without the solid bedrock of nutrition undergirding it? The answer is overwhelmingly no, you cannot. So how do we do this? How do we help to support the body's replenishing of its nutrients and support the reknitting of tissue? There are a few main herbs that are helpful for this. Number one is comfrey. Comfrey leaf is a fantastic herb for support. It has a wonderful compound called allantoin in it, which helps to reknit tissue. But rather than trying to source these things, if you're looking for a one-stop shop, again, the Dr. Christopher's Kit has a couple of things I think you're going to find very valuable. I have talked about this extensively. This is the Complete Bone and Tissue Repair. And the Complete Bone and Tissue Repair actually has white oak bark, lungwort, slippery elm, remember that, it's a demulcent, marshmallow root, mullein, black walnut, gravel root, wormwood, plantain, skullcap. Skullcap is a wonderful nervine, by the way, and also lobelia and aloe vera. In addition to the pill form, there's also the topical rub. The women of old in particular, and really ancient peoples, understood the relationship between the plant world and between their own bodies. And when you look at ways to help support your body in times of hardship, even if you are not in an area that is an operating theater for warfare, or you're not in an area where there's a lot of trouble, if we get into a prolonged situation where we don't have the grid, we are going to be doing, by default, more manual work. More manual work means more injuries. That means more slips of an axe, God forbid. More burns, that's another one. More core injuries, more back injuries. All of these things are a direct consequence of a destabilized world where we have less access to the ease of what we've been used to. So friends, the goal here with this video, hopefully, has been today to educate you and to help empower you to take steps to shield yourself against the realities of disease and morbidity in wartime. We know these to be the case throughout history because history recounts of this. Whether it's the Spanish siege of Grenada, where typhus killed, like 15,000 men, or malaria, which was endemic in the United States up until quite recently in the early 1900s, or smallpox epidemics and measles outbreaks during the 1860s. All of these get spread during times of international and domestic conflict. It behooves us then to cover our bases in respiratory diseases, digestive diseases, and wound care, really with an eye towards the sustainable. Buying things over the counter at the in the pharmaceutical realm, that is valuable, okay? That is valuable, and many people feel more comfortable with it. They feel more comfortable with buying something like a cough syrup or buying something like a cough suppressant because that's what they're used to. But the issue is sustainability of that supply line, and overall, is that implementation that we're using, is it effective for really restoring the person back to health? And I will stand by this all day long. Symptom suppression does not equal curing a disease. Symptom suppression only knocks out your body's defense mechanisms. In order for us to return people back to health, we have to attack it at the root of the cause, which is 9 times out of 10 malnutrition and weakness of the functional tissues. It is this case now. It will most definitely be that way in times of war, and particularly in times of supply line disruption, which we can anticipate in a conflict as intermingled and as many faceted as World War III. So friends, I hope you enjoyed the video today. If you did, I hope you'll subscribe to me here on YouTube, Patriot Nurse. You can also stay with me and support me on Patreon, subscribe to our cryptocurrency and PayPal. Friends, I've mentioned a whole bunch of different herbs here, and the kit, I've mentioned this before, but friends, this kit you can find on my website, thepatriotnurse.com. Also, the book, I really recommend that you get this book. It's a $15 add-on, but my focus in this is to equip people to be the functional provider of health in their local community. We need more community leaders for what is coming up. And community leadership, by necessity, eschews dependency. When we go towards the holistic and we go towards the nutritive and the herbal superfoods, we are decreasing our dependency upon the pharmaceutical world, big pharma in general, the government as an outcropping of it, and also by educating ourselves, whether it's with the books that I have or going to your local library. You can do this for free. I've got 10 years of back catalog here that you can watch for free on YouTube. The books that are on my bookshelf at the patriotnurse.com website, those are cost-effective ways for you to educate yourself as well. I have online courses as well. I really want people to get set up for success in this because the time for preparing is getting shorter and shorter. The reality is coming fast upon us. And when you consider in the midst of the global instability, the currency instability that is undergirding our demise here that is coming in the United States, we must be more self-sufficient in this and really return to the ancient path. And the ancient path is what worked for our ancestors and what is overall sustainable for what we can find outdoors in nature or what we can readily get here at home, domestically grown and cultivated. So thank you guys so much for being here with me today. I hope you have a very, very blessed weekend. For now, it's Patriot Nurse signing off, and I'll see y'all later.